You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
You might have been wondering while watching the latest episodes of Jujutsu Kaisen, why do some of these fight scenes look as if they were edited by someone experiencing an aneurysm? You might have had similar questions during the initial broadcasts of One Punch Man Season 2, certain scenes from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, My Hero Academia, and likely many other examples.
Wow, it is dark in here.
The answer might surprise you, especially judging by some of the discussions I've seen online.
They said it never gave you niggas!
インターネット
The greatest shame is to have seen so many people blaming MAPPA and the animators in particular for the excessive ghosting and dimming in episodes 31 and 32.
I'm like, what is it me for?
But that's not even the tip of the iceberg concerning both the misinformation and the complexity surrounding the subject. But dear old Smith boy, what exactly are ghosting and dimming, and who is to blame for this visual vomit? Well, we'll get to that if you'll shut up for a few minutes. I would like to assure you, however, that this is literally, probably, the most thoroughly researched video on the subject. I would know. I tried to find a video that properly explains all of this. I couldn't even find videos properly explaining most individual components of the subject, and dug through mountains of unsubstantiated, sourceless claims scattered all over the internet. Anyway, rest assured your questions will be answered in detail, but first, we have to talk about Pokemon. It all starts in the year of our Porygon, 1997. On Tuesday night, December 16th, the 38th episode of Season 1 airs, Den no Senshi Porygon, or Computer Warrior Porygon. Being that this is Pokemon we're talking about, the episode broadcasts to over 37 TV stations, reaching around 4.6 million households. It's the highest rated program for its time slot. Conjecture is that Japanese housing is, generally speaking, relatively cramped at the time. TVs of this generation are of course much smaller as well, implying that many viewers sit in small, dark rooms huddled close to the TV. The plot of the episode is of little importance to the subject. What you do need to know is that Ash and the gang are sent into cyberspace using something called the Dimension Teleporter in order to investigate an issue with the Pokeball transfer system. This issue is later found to be a virus within said system. Unfortunately, Nurse Joy, who doesn't realize people are inside, sends in an antivirus program which manifests itself as missiles for some reason. Thinking fast, Pikachu starts blasting with a thunderbolt. This causes bright red and blue lights to start flashing, once again for some reason. At the peak of the episode's most infamous scene, viewers experience blurred vision, headaches, dizziness, nausea, blindness, convulsions, and unconsciousness. The unfortunate and tragic reality is that around 685 children are rushed to hospitals by ambulance due to epileptic seizures. Though many recover before arrival, more than 150 are admitted, and 2 remain hospitalized for over 2 weeks. 12,000 other children report mild symptoms that are said to more closely resemble mass hysteria. The Japanese press apparently referred to this incident as, get this, Pokemon shock. Yeah. A little on the nose, don't you think, folks? It's honestly difficult to exaggerate just how overboard they went with this scene. I'm not gonna risk showing it unedited here. This episode never aired again in any country, but you guys know where to find it. Wink wink, nudge nudge.
I'm gonna do it, Janae. I'm gonna say the M-word.
The most infamous and intense scene in question lasts for approximately 4.5 seconds. The scene is fast, it's bright, and it consists of strobing, fully saturated red and blue lights at 12 Hz, or 12 cycles per second. Don't let the 12 cycles per second phrase fool you, by the way. I watched the scenes frame by frame, and there are times at which these strobing lights alternate literally every single frame, sometimes filling the entire screen. That's 24 actual flashes in a single second. I have no idea how this got the green light. Perhaps their logic was that the flashes should be in parity with the fastest cuts of animation, but still.
What were they thinking with this load of
Studies would later conclude that 5 to 10% of viewers had mild symptoms which did not require treatment. Although only about 1 out of 4,000 or 0.025% of people are susceptible to epileptic seizures, the amount of people affected by this episode was unprecedented and remains so to this day. People don't necessarily even need epilepsy to be affected by such triggers, hence the headaches and other milder symptoms experienced by those relatively more sensitive to flickering lights. The number of undiagnosed, symptom-free, and even completely non-epileptic viewers adversely affected by the scene's extreme nature is further proof of just how unprecedented it was. The silver lining is that no one died, and studies 3 years later involving 103 patients found that most had no further seizures following the incident. That is not to say that the event was without lasting effects. It will likely be no surprise that both the immediate response and aftermath were extreme. The episode was pulled from rotation and, once again, never aired again in any country. Pokemon went on a 4-month hiatus. Apologies were issued, retailers all over Japan pulled copies of the series from their shelves, and Nintendo's stock value dropped over 3% the following day. Japan's National Police Agency ordered that the anime's producers be questioned about the contents and production process of the show, and though I could find no confirmed sources, it's claimed that an emergency meeting was held by the Japanese Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare to discuss the incident as well as information collected from involved hospitals with experts on the topic. In the aftermath of this incident, TV Tokyo and other broadcasters established a series of guidelines for animated programs in Japan as well as other territories. These television broadcasters, medical officials, and the United Kingdom's Independent Television Commission joined forces to ensure that this phenomenon was never repeated again. And that brings us to the specific restrictions and post-process editing techniques implemented after this incident.
No, get those lights off! Off!
Since there seems to be some conflicting information, in order to avoid any confusion, I'm going to start by simply reading the guidelines found on the TV Tokyo website. 1. Avoid the use of more than one light flash per each 1/3 second, 8 frames for film or 10 frames for television. 2. Because sudden cut changes or swift image changes will also cause the same impact as light flashes, avoid their use in excess of one such change per each 1/3 second. 3. Flashes and cut changes using the color isolated red will also be dangerous. However, there are no problems with color combinations which exclude isolated red, when the luminance or brightness is at the same level. 4. As a general rule, it is desirable to avoid the use of systematic patterns, strips, bars, spirals, dartboards, etc., with varying luminance levels. Patterns which reverse are the most provocative, but those which drift are not provocative. End quote. The Wikipedia page for Computer Warrior Porygon mentions that stripes, whirls, and concentric circles should not take up a large part of the television screen. It also states that flashing images, especially those with red, should not flicker faster than 3 times per second. If the image does not have red, it still should not flicker faster than 5 times per second. Flashing images should not be displayed for a total duration of more than 2 seconds. I would assume these minor conflicts in detail stem from outdated information or guidelines obtained from other broadcasters, but it's difficult to tell. It is Wikipedia after all. The TV Tokyo guidelines of course also mention isolated red in particular. Everything I've read seems to insinuate that the color red has a greater effect. Red also happens to be the most eye-catching color. This is why you often see beautiful girls in red dresses,
Come on, you know you're into this.
red sports cars, YouTube thumbnails involving red, etc. It is, however, ironically infamous for making text difficult to read. Look forward to my top 10 facts about the color red video.
Amazing.
Anyway, that brings us to what is known as the Harding test. As far as I understand it, by law, every finalized animation submitted to a Japanese broadcast studio undergoes the Harding test, a quote, automatic test for photosensitive epilepsy provocative image sequences in television content. That's a mouthful. The algorithms behind this test analyze video frames second to second for potentially provocative image sequences and log any luminance flashes, red flashes, and spatial patterns over the prescribed amplitude and frequency limits. Footage can of course either pass or fail checks, though I've seen it claimed that footage can also pass with a warning. I'm unsure how much that distinction matters, of course. After these checks, the adjustments or effects we'll be speaking about are applied to any such cuts of animation which offend the aforementioned guidelines. I've seen a lot of people mention that time slots affect this, and that the aforementioned tests and adjustments are more common with certain evening broadcasts. This would kind of make sense, since on-screen warnings were implemented encouraging viewers to, quote, watch anime in a well-lit room and sit far away from the TV, following the Pokemon incident. Also because people are more likely to be flipping through channels or viewing in a dark-lit environment during certain time slots. However, I found absolutely nothing confirming this, and furthermore found plenty of seemingly more reputable claims stating that all animation broadcasts undergo these tests. Please correct me if you can confirm otherwise, but I do think that makes far more sense, considering that this is a legal matter primarily meant to protect children from seizures. In lieu of these time slot discussions, I've also seen people mention that Demon Slayer has shared the same time slots as Jujutsu Kaisen previously, is obviously extremely flashy, and seemed unaffected in the past. However, apparently Ufotable actually goes the extra mile here and creates their own modified broadcast versions of certain scenes from Demon Slayer before sending those off to undergo the Harding test. Anyway, that brings us to the adjustments used to mitigate the potential effects of scenes that do not pass checks during the Harding test or any other PSE testing I might be ignorant of. The most self-explanatory adjustment is called dimming. When a scene is dimmed, it's, well, darkened. A filter is added to reduce the overall brightness of a scene such that the brightest cuts of animation no longer pass a certain threshold. Unfortunately, this effect seems fairly indiscriminate and will affect the entire cut of animation, not just the brightest pixels on screen. I would assume this is the main reason Ufotable goes to the trouble of creating their own versions of scenes. As far as I can tell, focusing on dimming specifically their trademark bright effects layers and the light cast by said effects layers. A video demonstrating this will be linked below. It's pretty interesting to see the different types of scenes they alter for this broadcast version. Second is what's known as ghosting, or what many often refer to as a blurring effect. Just to be clear, we are not talking about intentional smear frames meant to imply quick motion. We are not talking about blurred layers that simulate depth of field, and we are not talking about exaggerated stretch frames. These all have their place in animation, and I'd actually like to dedicate a video to talking about some of my favorite stretch frames. One of these days. What ghosting actually refers to is the act of overlaying the previous frame on top of the following frame. As far as I understand it, this technique is meant to soften the effect of scenes which feature especially quick motion cuts, or quick cuts from scene to scene, by blending or blurring the effect of that motion together. Unfortunately, these look absolutely atrocious, especially the ghosting, quote unquote, in my opinion. As myself, my cousin, and many commenters online can attest, in this case it also literally hurts to look at. My cousin said he felt like he was going cross-eyed. It's probably because your eyes can't really tell what to focus on anymore. As for who's to blame for our Jujutsu Kaisen looking like this,
Look how they massacred my boy.
it's almost certainly not Mappa's fault. Studios have very little real control over this, and the idea that this is the experience animators and directors would want us to have is just absurd. Could they go with the Ufotable approach? Sure. It's a very commendable approach to an unfortunate circumstance, but it's kinda ridiculous to ask every studio to jump through extra hoops. It's also definitely gotta be a huge resource dump. This would not only require extra work creating and rendering multiple versions of scenes, but would also require work determining which scenes require such adjustments. All resources which could be spent further improving the final product. I'm also not sure it would do anything to avoid ghosting in scenes which don't actually involve bright flashing lights, but simply have many extremely fast cuts or movements.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Editor's note, while editing and doing further research, I discovered that there's actually a website where you could submit your video footage to undergo the Harding test. This certainly makes the prospect of determining what needs to be adjusted and then adjusting said footage much simpler. The site claims they've been part of the video production industry since the late 70s and are indeed capable of testing footage to Japanese specs. They also claim that registration is as simple as signing up, uploading your footage, paying them for their services, and getting your results quote unquote immediately. I can't confirm this all personally as I'm not quite that committed to this video project. Funny as it might be to upload this video itself and have it tested, apparently the test starts at £30 or $37.64 for under 2 minutes of video footage. So yeah. Anyway, I just thought this seemed relevant, even necessary, to paint a hopefully full picture concerning my talk about Ufotable, the difficulties of doing this work in-house, and of course the broader subject of this video, and back to the original script. It's also very easy to point the finger at Crunchyroll, and I do have a myriad of issues with them, but at the end of the day, it's not Crunchyroll who dims and ghosts anime footage, and it's not Crunchyroll who censors our violence and fan service. After all, Crunchyroll would never put in that much extra work.
You serious?
Especially for no extra profit. They also likely wouldn't even have time during the tight window of a simulcast schedule, where they already frequently make mistakes with subtitles. Contracts are formed and upheld to license specific versions of footage provided by production committees. And as far as I understand it, that's pretty much it. More info on production committees coming in a future Chainsaw Man video, by the way. That's the version of the footage they licensed, and that's the footage they're allowed to stream. Let me reiterate. In the vast majority of cases, they are literally not even allowed to modify the footage they receive. That's what a contract is. Forgive me if I'm kicking a dead horse, but you would not believe the number of people who still don't understand this. Crunchyroll simply receives the same TV broadcast license anyone else would when airing in parity with said TV broadcasts. There are apparently some fringe exceptions, whereby premium Japanese satellite channels receive uncensored versions of ecchi shows, but I'm pretty sure you can see how irrelevant that is to my point. Is it awfully convenient that you can only experience unedited, uncensored versions of many shows by buying physical copies? Yes. Yes, it is. Would it be nice if companies like Crunchyroll made a real effort to convince production committees to release the unedited footage for streaming on platforms not under any of these restrictions more often? Yes, it absolutely would. But, and this is just a little theory crafting of my own, the result might also send Japanese viewers running from TV broadcasts and Blu-rays to American providers, which seems like the very definition of shooting oneself in the foot to me. At the end of the day, this is Crunchyroll we're talking about. I don't necessarily suspect any intentional malice from them. I'm just also not the slightest bit surprised at this perceived lack of effort. Not sure why any of you still are either. Modern Crunchyroll is a large, borderline monopolized company like any other. They simply want to make as much money as possible with as little expense and as little effort as possible. They buy up as many popular licenses as they can as quickly as possible, often without even knowing what they're buying.
It's called hentai, and it's art.
And then host them on a streaming service that is still missing dozens of basic features and hosts just as many issues even today.
There is no passion, there is no vision, there is aggression.
That's to say nothing of their business ethics. But that's all, once again, a very large topic for another video. The point is, if Crunchyroll's gonna care, you're gonna have to make them. Why else would they negotiate another new license agreement, which is gonna cost them yet more time, money, and effort? With that said, if you're interested, there is a change.org petition running to remove dimming and ghosting for the Crunchyroll release. As I write, it has around
2200
signatures of its current 2,500 signature goal. No guarantee it does anything, but if you care, it might be worth a few seconds of your time. Anyway, feel free to drop any context or corrections below, and if you're ever wondering who you should be mad at about these restrictions, remember, just blame Pikachu, production committees who don't readily release licenses for unedited footage, and of course, as always, big government.
But I tell you what, I don't know about you, but I'm going to go to bed.
Go to bed.